Charles Porterfield Krauth was a pastor, theologian and educator in the Lutheran branch of Christianity. He is a leading figure in the revival of the Lutheran Confessions connected to Neo-Lutheranism in the United States. Education and parish ministry. Born in Martinsburg, Virginia to minister Charles Philip Krauth, young Krauth graduated from Gettysburg College in 1839, and 2 years later from the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Gettysburg. From 1841 to 1852, the younger Rev. Krauth served congregations in Baltimore, Maryland, Martinsburg, and Winchester, Virginia. During the winter of 1853–54, for 3 months he served the Dutch Reformed congregation in St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, where he was visiting on account of his wife's illness. Krauth later published a sketch of this visit entitled A Winter and Spring in the Danish West Indies. Upon returning, Krauth was called to congregations in Pittsburgh from 1855 to 1859, and Philadelphia from 1859 to 1861. The Confessional Revival. In 1861, Krauth resigned from parish ministry to serve full-time as editor of the Lutheran, a theological journal. One of the Lutherans' goals was to restore the confessions of faith found in the Book of Concord to prominence in Lutheran church life. These documents, especially the Augsburg Confession, have always been identified as the cornerstones of a distinctively Lutheran theological identity. But during the 18th and 19th centuries, Lutherans in the United States had interpreted the Confessions very loosely. A key figure in this movement was Samuel Simon Schmucker, one of Krauth's professors at Gettysburg, whose American Lutheranism, as outlined in the definite synodical platform of 1855, proposed that the Augsburg Confession was mistaken on such questions as baptismal regeneration and the real presence in the Eucharist. In contrast, Krauth and his collaborators preferred a more literal reading of the Lutheran Confessions. They saw Martin Luther's theology not as a radical rejection of traditional patristic and medieval theology, but as an essentially conservative return to first principles. In both theology and worship, they sought to create Lutheranism in which the medieval heritage was more readily apparent than the Enlightenment adaptations. For example, one of Krauth's major books, The Conservative Reformation and Its Theology, is an extended defense of the real presence. Krauth was personally influenced by his reading of the Mercersburg theologians, John Williamson Nevin and Philip Schaff, who had attempted a similar repristination of Calvinist theology within the American branch of the German Reformed Church. Nevin and Schaff had called themselves evangelical Catholics, a term which has come to be used rarely, if at all, among the Reformed churches, but quite commonly among Lutherans. Similar revival movements like Neo-Lutheranism took place in the early 19th century among Roman Catholics and Anglicans, as for example in Guérange's refounding of the abbey at Solesmes, and in the Oxford movement. European Lutheranism had a similar revival, led by theologians and pastors such as Wilhelm Lohe. The General Council. Conflict between the American Lutherans and the leaders of the Confessional Revival led to a schism. In 1864, Krauth was asked to lead the new seminary in Philadelphia, which was founded by churches of the Pennsylvania Ministerium to rival the seminary in Gettysburg. In 1867, Krauth and his schoolmate Rev. William Passavant founded the General Council of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. The General Council had 7 regional bodies which had withdrawn from the General Synod. During Krauth's lifetime, the LTSP was at Franklin Square. In 1889 it moved to Mount Airy. In 1908 its new library that was dedicated as the Krauth Memorial Library in memory of Krauth. As the first professor of systematic theology at the new seminary, Krauth was at the intellectual center of the Reform movement. He read its fundamental articles of faith and church polity, as well as the constitutions for its congregations. His liturgical scholarship guided the formation of general council worship materials. From 1868, Krauth also served as professor of mental and moral philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania, and from 1873 as vice provost. One of Krauth's most controversial acts was to prepare a series of theses on pulpit and altar fellowship, called the Akron-Galesburg Rule. These may be summarized as saying, Lutheran pulpits are for Lutheran ministers only, and Lutheran altars are for Lutheran communicants only. Quote, although Krauth's rule permitted exceptions, it was nonetheless a strong repudiation of the broad ecumenical relationships pursued by the General Synod. Late travels. In 1880 he went to Europe to visit the scenes of the life and labors of Martin Luther, in order to complete a biography, for which he had made extensive preparations. His death prevented completion of the project. Literary works: The Conservative Reformation and Its Theology, his most significant work. Thorluck's Commentary on the Gospel of John, translator. Christian Liberty in relation to the usages of the Evangelical Lutheran Church maintained and defended. William Fleming's Vocabulary of Philosophy, editor, contributing an introduction and additions. Enlarged, New York, 1877. The Augsburg Confession, translator, contributing a historical introduction, notes, and index. Infant Baptism and Infant Salvation in the Calvinistic System, a review of Hodge's Systematic Theology. Ulrich's Review of Strauss. Berkeley's Principles, Prolegomena, Notes of Uberweg, and original annotations. Chronicle of the Augsburg Confession. Krauth also wrote poems, translated hymns from the Latin and German, and was a frequent contributor to religious periodicals.